mind.
June 9th, 2020. The funeral for George Floyd was held in Houston, Texas. The eulogy was given by Reverend Al Sharpton, and we'll get to his remarks in a moment. But first, I want to point out the significance of the city of Houston and how recent events from the past are directly related to this event. Previously, we discussed Kanye West's performance at a surprise concert at the Harris County Jail in Houston, and discovered that Kanye West's album, Jesus is King, and its association to Roden Crater represented the key to the bottomless pit and the opening of that pit. This meant that the performance in the jail was done specifically to represent the rise of the king of the bottomless pit and his release from his prison. This also connects to 6ix9ine's release from prison due to coronavirus concerns, not to mention the fact that 6ix9ine also represents duality. It is also important to note that the hand sign for the city of Houston is the devil horns. Clearly, the world is being primed for the rise of the anti-Messiah, the son of the devil, and the coronavirus represents his crowning or coronation.
I'll never forget last week when the family part that was there talked with former President Obama on the phone and said, we're not asking you to come because it'll take all the Secret Service stuff and all that, but we just want to thank you and your wife for calling our name of our brother.
Notice that the color scheme chosen for the funeral was black and white. This connects to the Masonic checkerboard floor and the use of both black and white magic. It also connects back to the previous video when we spoke about light versus darkness, good versus evil, and duality. In fact, Al Sharpton's white robe kind of reminds you of a stormtrooper's uniform, which also connects to Star Wars and the light or dark force awakening. In his sermon, Al Sharpton mentioned the cornerstone by directly referring to George Floyd as being the cornerstone when he said,
he took the rejected stone, the stone that the builder rejected. They rejected him for jobs. They rejected him for positions. They rejected him to play certain teams. God took the rejected stone and made him the cornerstone of a movement that's going to change the whole wide world.
In saying this, Al Sharpton equated George Floyd with the Messiah, since the scriptures tell us that Yehoshua is the stone the builders refused in Acts 4 verses 10 through 11, when it declares, "Then let this be known to all of you and to all the people of Israel. It is by the name of Yehoshua HaMashiach of Nazareth, whom you crucified, but whom God raised from the dead, that this man stands before you healed. He is the stone you builders rejected, which has become the cornerstone." 1 Peter chapter 2 verse 6 also declares, "For it stands in scripture, see, I lay in Zion a stone, a chosen and precious cornerstone, and the one who believes in him will never be put to shame." Also see Isaiah 28:16, Psalm 118:22, and Luke 20:17. Al Sharpton's statement makes George Floyd the cornerstone and thereby a representation of a false Christ. However, what I need you to understand is that Freemasonry is shrouded in secrecy and mystery. They employ the use of signs, symbols, emblems, legends, and allegory to illustrate a story. Classic examples of this is the use of the Old and New Testaments of the Holy Bible to hide rituals and ceremonies full of symbolism. By employing the use of symbolism, we can understand that George Floyd, which refers to a farmer or worker of the earth who plants the seeds of darkness, evil, doom, and gloom, and knowing that the pitchfork is a farming tool associated with the devil, as well as the fact that he was connected to the coronavirus.
The autopsy shows he was positive for COVID-19.
We can understand that they are indeed pointing us to the crowning and worship of the Antichrist. In fact, the cornerstone, which is used by stonemasons, is a stone that forms the base of a corner of a building joining two walls and is a Freemasonic symbol as well.
God took the rejected stone and made him the cornerstone of a movement that's going to change the whole wide world.
Not only did Al Sharpton mention the cornerstone in his speech as it relates to George Floyd, Killer Mike also mentioned the cornerstone in his speech as well.
Fundamental law stated that whites were naturally the superior race, and the Confederacy was built on a cornerstone. It's called a cornerstone speech. Look it up. The cornerstone speech that blacks would always be subordinate.
It should be noted that Killer Mike was wearing black and white with a shirt that read "Kill Your Masters" on it also. As we discussed previously, this was a reference to the French Revolution, the destruction of the old world order and the building of the new. This relates directly to the statues of Christopher Columbus and the slave owner Eric Colston that were torn down as well. Al Sharpton went on to mention the destruction of these statues in his eulogy when he said,
All over the world, I've seen grandchildren of slave masters tearing down slave master statue over in England and put it in the river.
The destruction of these statues are akin to taking a broad eraser to history. However, if you don't know your history, you are doomed to repeat it. The fact of the matter is, at least 12 chief executives were slave owners during their lifetimes. Of these, 8 held enslaved people while in office. George Washington kept 300 slaves at his Mount Vernon plantation. Thomas Jefferson owned at least 175 slaves. James Madison, James Monroe, and Andrew Jackson each kept several dozen slaves. Martin Van Buren owned slaves. William Henry Harrison owned several slaves. John Tyler and James K. Polk were both slaveholders during their stints in office. Zachary Taylor, who served from 1849 to 1850, was the last chief executive to keep enslaved people while living in the White House. He owned 150 slaves on plantations in Kentucky, Mississippi, and Louisiana. Andrew Johnson, who served as Lincoln's vice president before becoming president in 1865, had owned at least half a dozen slaves. And the last president to personally own slaves was Ulysses S. Grant, who served 2 terms between 1869 and 1877. Not to mention, 41 of the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence owned slaves, and of the 55 delegates to the Constitutional Convention, about 25 owned slaves as well. So, what are the greater implications of killing your masters by tearing down history and destroying the old world order? Inevitably, this would include the destruction of the U.S. Constitution, which includes the Bill of Rights, including the First Amendment, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, the right to peacefully assemble, and freedom of religion. The Second Amendment, which includes the right to keep and bear arms. The Fourth Amendment, which guarantees personal security and freedom from unreasonable search and seizures. The Fifth Amendment, which gives you the right to remain silent and not be a witness against yourself. The Sixth Amendment, which guarantees a right to a speedy trial by jury. And every other amendment which helps to protect your natural rights to life, liberty, and property. There's a satanic ritual going on here with the implied goal of destroying the historical foundations of society, whether good or evil, in order to reshape society into a new organism. And how do they expect to reach this point? Through the promotion of chaos and anarchy.
Anarchy is, and always has been, a romance. It is clearly the best way and the only morally sensible way to run the world. That everybody should be the master of their own destiny. Everybody should be their own leader.
After the events in Minneapolis and the death of George Floyd, there's been discussion around the country about defunding and ultimately disbanding the police.
Every day of the past 2 weeks, some protesters have been calling for the defunding of police. Others want to go even further or dismantle local police agencies. In a stunning move announced just last night, the city of Minneapolis is doing just that.
Our commitment is to end our city's toxic relationship with the Minneapolis Police Department, to end policing as we know it, and to recreate systems of public safety that actually keep us safe.
You will remember in the previous video when we discussed George Floyd's murder, we discussed the policy of the police and the government. In fact, the police car even had the word police on its license plate. Police means public order and is derived from the word policy. Policy means a course or principle of action adopted or proposed by a government. Since there is a call to defund and disband the police, this signals a clear change in policy. This connects to Daniel 7:25, which declares, "And he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws, and they shall be given into his hand until a time and times, and the dividing of time." The scriptures clearly tell us that the Antichrist will be an agent of change, and we know that Obama's campaign was all about change. I must also mention that Minnesota Governor Walz called on citizens to honor the funeral for George Floyd by requesting that all Minnesotans pause their lives for 8 minutes and 46 seconds for a moment of silence. This is because the officer who killed Floyd kneeled on his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds.
Wickedness in high places. When you can put your knee on a man's neck and hold it there 8 minutes and 46 seconds, that's not even.
The number 846 connects back to Obama, who is number 44, which can be expressed as 4 plus 4, which equals 8, and who read Psalm 46, declaring himself to be God on September 11th.
Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth.
This gives us the number 846. Dave Chappelle released a stand-up special called 846 on June 12th, or 666, since June is the 6th month and 12 is 6 plus 6.
What are you signifying? That you can kneel on a man's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds and feel like you wouldn't get the wrath of God.
Notice Dave declares the wrath of God will be the result of the murder of George Floyd. This is a direct reference to Revelation chapter 6, verses 1 through 17, the opening of the 6 seals, which begins with the rise of the Antichrist, the rider on the white horse who goes forth conquering and to conquer, and ends with the wrath of God being poured out upon the earth.
And then I was just out there and upside down, not having no TV show, trying to figure life out, and the election was going on in the background, and this guy, Barack Obama, was picking up steam. And I had a chance to go to the last debate on the Democratic ticket, and I went. It's me and Chris Tucker, sitting in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. It's the last 3 candidates. It was Barack Obama, John Edwards, and Hillary Clinton. Now, Obama's a lot taller than Edwards and Clinton, and he had the center podium. And at one point, they're all on stage, and they start fussing, and Obama goes, "Look, none of us are perfect," like this. His hands was like this, and there was light shining behind his head, and the other 2 candidates was looking up at the nigga, and I was sitting in the audience like, this nigga looks like Jesus.
It also connects to the statue called Rumors of War that was put on display at 8th Avenue and 46th Street in Times Square. The statue was created by the artist who painted number 44, Obama's presidential portrait. It is no coincidence that the address where the statue was unveiled at 8th Ave and 46th Street is the same amount of time that the officer kneeled on George Floyd's neck, 8 minutes and 46 seconds. This connects directly back to the destruction of the old statues by George Floyd protesters, since the artist who created Rumors of War said it was created in direct response to the monument to Confederate General Jeb Stuart, and directly engages the national conversation around monuments in their role in perpetuating incomplete histories and inequality. The title of the statue, Rumors of War, is taken from Matthew 24, verses 5 through 8, which speaks of false Christs when it declares, "For many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. And ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass. But the end is not yet. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. And there shall be famines and pestilences, and earthquakes in diverse places. All these are the beginning of sorrows." We can be sure then that this statue is symbolic of the rider on the white horse, the Antichrist. Also, Matthew 24 verses 5 through 8 parallel the opening of the 6 seals found in Revelation chapter 6 verses 1 through 12, which include the rise of the Antichrist, wars, famine, pestilence, and the earthquake, when the sun becomes black as sackcloth and the moon turns to blood, just before the return of Messiah. But I digress. As it concerns the disbanding of police, no one has given any details as of yet to explain what defunding or disbanding the police department will look like. Because what is likely to occur if police are defunded or disbanded is that the legitimate function of the state in preserving people's lives, safety, and property from criminals will suffer, while not reforming the system at all, nor doing anything about abusive police officers. Anarchy is a state of disorder due to absence or non-recognition of authority. This is lawlessness. We know that the Antichrist is the lawless one, according to 2 Thessalonians 2:8, which declares, "And then the lawless one will be revealed, whom the Lord Yahushua will consume with the breath of his mouth and will destroy with the brightness of his coming. Therefore, it only makes sense that he would be the one to change times and laws or policies which would lead to lawlessness. Interestingly enough, during the George Floyd protests in Chicago, a man in a Joker's mask set fire to a police car. This connects to Batman in the movie The Dark Knight when the Joker causes chaos.
Introduce a little anarchy. Upset the established order and everything becomes chaos. I'm an agent of chaos.
Also, a man who dressed up as Batman showed up at one of the protests in Philadelphia. His entry as he walked out of a cloud of smoke was inspired by a scene from The Dark Knight Rises when Batman asks Gordon to light it up.
Light it up.
Previously, we have discussed the fact that Batman is symbolic of a vampire, or Dracula, the son of the dragon, who is Lucifer. Also, The Dark Knight Rises represents the rise of Apollyon, the king of the bottomless pit, found in Revelation chapter 9, verse 11. This was depicted in the movie The Dark Knight Rises, when Batman climbs out of his underground prison from a hole or pit in the belly of the earth. This also connects back to Kanye West performing at a prison in Houston. His album, Jesus is King, the connection to Rogan Crater, and the opening of the bottomless pit, and the release of 6ix9ine from prison as well. It is important to understand the significance of the Dark Knight showing up at the riots in Philadelphia as well. Philadelphia was the headquarters, if not the official capital, of the colonies during the American Revolution. The phrase "light it up," which was used by the Dark Knight, then symbolizes burning the current system that is in place to the ground, connecting back to Killer Mike's statement.
We want to see the system that sets up for systemic racism burnt to the ground.
Now, don't misunderstand me. I do not in any way support the systemic racism which fuels the machine that unfairly, unjustly, and unapologetically destroys the lives of countless nameless and voiceless minorities every day. The same racism and bigotry that has been prevalent in this country since its inception. However, I do recognize that the oppression, the unjust cruelty, mental, physical, and emotional abuse that we as a people have suffered here in America since the first slaves stepped off of the slave ship called the White Lion at Point Comfort, Virginia, near Jamestown in 1619, that our deplorable and wretched condition was a direct result of our disobedience to the Most High. As a consequence for that disobedience, we became subject to the generational curses found in Deuteronomy 28, verses 15 through 68, just as the Most High promised we would. However, the scriptures declare, "If my people, which are called by my name, shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and will heal their land." 2 Chronicles 7:14. Jeremiah 32:37 declares, "I will surely gather my people from all the lands to which I have banished them, in my furious anger and great wrath, and I will return them to this place and make them dwell in safety. Ezekiel 34:13 declares, I will bring them out from the peoples, gather them from the countries, and bring them into their own land. I will feed them on the mountains of Israel, in the ravines, and in all the settlements of the land. This is not our country, and no man-made government will ever provide equality for our people in the land of our captivity, lands that our people were banished to as exiles under the curse of disobedience. We as a people need to repent of our wicked ways. We need to come to the knowledge of our true heritage and learn to worship the Most High in spirit and truth. The plan to destroy the old world order will not signal the birth of some global utopia based on peace and the oneness of humanity. It will only lead to a new world order, that is even more oppressive, more authoritarian, more hostile, tyrannical, and controlling of the people it governs, with a specific hatred, vitriol, and propensity towards violence and murder for all the children of the Most High, no matter what race you are, no matter what your skin color is. This is the New World Order that will be born of the dismantling of the old. The following is from the novel A Tale of Two Cities, Chapter 1, called The Period. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. We had everything before us. We had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven. We were all going direct the other way. In short, the period was so far like the present period that some of its noisiest authorities insisted on its being received for good or for evil in the superlative degree of comparison only. If you watch the two previous videos, you will understand the relevance of the opposing concepts mentioned here, like the twin cities, light versus darkness, good versus evil, wisdom versus foolishness, and heaven versus hell. Previously, we discussed Chris Cuomo's use of the phrase "a tale of two cities" in his coverage of the riots in the Twin City, Minneapolis.
My argument is this: we're really just battling one problem. America is a tale of two cities.
This was a reference to the novel A Tale of Two Cities in the French Revolution. It was also a reference to his father, Mario Cuomo's speech deriding Ronald Reagan.
Mr. President, you ought to know that this nation is more a tale of two cities than it is just a shining city on a hill.
This is important because the speech given by Ronald Reagan that Mario Cuomo was commenting on also plays a role in the larger scheme of things.
The past few days, when I've been at that window upstairs, I've thought a bit of the shining city upon a hill. The phrase comes from John Winthrop, who wrote it to describe the America he imagined.
In his speech, Ronald Reagan emphasized America as being a shining city upon a hill whose beacon light guides freedom-loving people everywhere. Keep this in mind as we'll come back to it in a moment. But for now, let me show you how it is connected to the orchestrated destruction of law and order in this country and the intentional effort to push America over the edge into chaos and civil war. On June 6, or 6/6, a veteran Santa Cruz County Sheriff's deputy was killed and a second was severely injured by an explosive device during an ambush in the Santa Cruz Mountains in Ben Lomond.
Santa Cruz Mountains, at least one suspect in custody after an apparent attack on Santa Cruz County Sheriff's deputies. Sources tell KPIX5 the suspect was armed with explosives. 2 deputies were wounded, one possibly by shrapnel, the other by a vehicle leaving the scene.
The shooter was identified as 32-year-old Stephen Carrillo, an active duty U.S. Air Force sergeant. His political affiliation was listed as libertarian. The word libertarian comes from libertas, meaning freedom. This connects the shooter to the revolutionaries or freedom fighters of the French and American Revolution, both of which were based on liberty, which is why the French have a Statue of Liberty and also gifted a twin image of that same Statue of Liberty to America. During the police officer's call to dispatch concerning the incident that was taking place, you will notice that she mentions Sam 2:3 twice, King 2:7, and King 1:7.
There's a patrol car up there along with Sam 2:3. Sam 2:3 has not made it out. King 2:7 is getting checked out by fire as he is hit with shrapnel. I am code 4. King 1:7, I copy.
In her call to dispatch, the officer says Sam 2:3 twice. This is a reference to 2 Samuel chapter 3. Interestingly enough, in 2 Samuel 3, there's a civil war between the house of Saul and the house of David. This connects to the riots and civil unrest that we are seeing as a result of the George Floyd incident. We know that Saul was led by the darkness of an evil spirit. See 1 Samuel chapter 16, verses 14, 16, and 23, as well as 1 Samuel 18:10. But the Spirit of God, which is a spirit of light, was upon David. See 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 13. So clearly, we are being shown light versus dark, good versus evil, through King Saul and King David. The officer also mentioned King 1:7. In 1 Kings chapter 1, verse 7, King David's son, Adonijah, usurps the kingdom. This is a reference to the usurper or supplanter, who is the Antichrist. It is also a reference to rebellion and revolution, since Adonijah rebelled against his father when he usurped the kingdom. Finally, the officer mentions King 2:7. In 2 Kings chapter 7, we are told that the Syrians flee. Verse 7 declares, "Wherefore they arose and fled in the twilight, and left their tents, and their houses, and their asses, even the camp as it was, and fled for their life." The name Syrian means exalted. To exalt means to raise high, to elevate, to lift up, which is a reference to God's chosen people who shall be exalted or lifted up and carried away when we are allowed to flee the wrath of God. This is clearly a warning about the war in heaven and the rebellion of the angels, the Antichrist who usurps the throne of Messiah, and the harpazo, or time when we shall be exalted, elevated, raised up, and carried away to flee from the wrath of God that is poured out onto the earth. You will also notice that one officer was hit by a white Dodge Charger or Mustang.
Go ahead. 2-7, a white sedan just took out fire and King 2-7. He was just hit by the vehicle. Be careful, I think it might have been a Dodge Charger, a Mustang, the white sedan, high rate of speed.
The symbol for Dodge is the ram. You may remember when we discussed the Bungie Young Super Bowl commercial, how the symbol for the Los Angeles Chargers was used along with the Rams to identify Barak with the horned god, since the lightning bolt means Barak. The mention of the white Mustang also connects Barak to the rider on the white horse, or Antichrist. We know that Obama has been connected to the rider on the white horse in the past through his speech at Mile High Stadium. This shooting occurred in Santa Cruz. The name Santa Cruz means Holy Cross. However, if you rearrange the word Santa, you get Satan's cross. Again, this points to the false Messiah figure. I want you also to notice the badge used by the Santa Cruz County Sheriff. It is a 7-pointed star. The 7-pointed star, or septagram, was used by Aleister Crowley, and it was known as the Star or Seal of Babylon, the Scarlet Woman, the mother of abominations. This connects back to Kanye West and Jimmy Page's album, Lucifer Rising. The actual location where this shooting occurred was called Ben Lomond. Ben Lomond means beacon, hill, or mountain. A beacon is a fire or light set up in a high or prominent position as a warning, signal, or celebration. Therefore, Beacon Hill means a light set up on a hill. This is a reference back to the phrase, a city on a hill, which was used by Ronald Reagan.
The past few days when I've been at that window upstairs, I've thought a bit of the shining city upon a hill.
But more importantly than Reagan's mention of a city on a hill, the original mention of the city on a hill comes from the Messiah himself. Matthew chapter 5 verses 14 through 16 declares, "Ye are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hid. Neither do men light a candle and put it under a bushel, but on a candlestick, and it giveth light unto all that are in the house. Let your light so shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven." The final question becomes, which do you choose? Light or darkness? Good or evil? Will you be a shining city on a hill to let your light shine before men so that they see the glory of the Most High in this time of darkness, doom, and gloom? Or will the light that is in you be evil and full of darkness? I choose the light of the Most High, and I will continue to let that light shine as a city on a hill, and I pray you do the same. If you have not surrendered your life to the Most High by accepting the blood sacrifice of Yahushua HaMashiach, which was made for the redemption of sin for all that truly believe in their heart, the time to do so is now. Light it up and let your light shine. Amen. Shalom.